Well, Sally, we've been talking about Prigozhin for well over a year now, and after that abortive coup, I don't think any of us expected Prigozhin's life expectancy to be more than, I think we predicted 3 months. It looks like it's 2 months, and hotel window, it was an air crash. I think he left a legacy after that abortive coup. One would have expected President Putin to act very swiftly and decisively, but probably because of the influence that Prigozhin had, not only as an oligarch, but also as the leader of the Wagner group, absolutely Putin would not want to make a martyr of him. And therefore, there was a bit of tap dancing around what to do with Yevgeny Prigozhin, what to do with his Wagner fighters, because, Putin, bluntly, his military has not delivered many battlefield successes. It's the Wagner forces that have. But all of a sudden, if you're dealing with mercenaries, you are dealing with a very difficult band of folks who are largely only interested in money. I think what we're seeing now is that over the past couple of months, we've seen gradually Yevgeny Prigozhin's business empire gradually broken apart. Some of it's been bought off him, some of it's been taken off him. We've seen the Wagner forces, some of them assimilated into the Russian military, some of them sent off to Africa, and some of them left in Belarus. And inevitably, that was clearing the decks, ready for Yevgeny Prigozhin's departure. The only question in my mind is why he didn't see this coming. He seemed to be still remaining in circulation. He turned up at if you remember, the Russian Africa conference only a few weeks back, seemed to be on the same stage as President Putin. And yet, what it appears now very clearly that his card was marked, his days were numbered, and it's no great surprise that he's met an untimely end.
We're just hearing from the Associated Press news agency that the jet belonged to Yevgeny Prigozhin. That is according to unconfirmed media reports we are getting via the Associated Press. And we also are hearing that the plane crash took place 60 miles north of Moscow. Now, of course, the future for Yevgeny Prigozhin certainly seemed unclear after that attempted mutiny back in June, Sean. I mean, there was a lot of speculation that he could meet an untimely end, but many felt that he could have also been protected simply by the power and influence that he has, not least within the Wagner group, but also the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, there's a couple of points there, Sally, one of which, after that abortive march, let's remember that Yevgeny Prigozhin used to be a hot dog salesman on the streets of St. Petersburg, and he had spent some time in prison, but a chance meeting with the President Putin meant that over time he became his chef, and then the two of them saw a very prosperous future because the businesses that Yevgeny Prigozhin started, he won contracts directly through his patronage of President Putin. So it's their mutual benefit, that friendship. And almost certainly that's why the Wagner group of mercenaries, Russia has used those not only in Ukraine, but around the world with some influence. It was no great surprise that Prigozhin won the support and admiration of President Putin. Unfortunately, as ever with these things, sometimes egos start to get in the way. The rot started to set in when it was evident Prigozhin was able to deliver battlefield successes when General Gerasimov and Sergei Shoigu, the main army boss and the defense secretary of Russia, were not able to deliver that. There was friction because they felt threatened. They stopped giving weapons and arms to Yevgeny Prigozhin. That meant Prigozhin started to become a lot more vocal about his criticism. I don't think his words were ever criticizing Putin directly, but more the frustration that Russia was involved in a war, and yet it appeared to have incompetent leaders in charge. But of course, Prigozhin just didn't know when to stop, and that ego rapidly ran himself into trouble. Who knows why he stopped his abortive attempt on Moscow? He got some way up the M4, not to Bristol, but towards Moscow. And whatever happened on the phone call between the Belarusian leader and Prigozhin. It dissuaded him from marching further, but it does appear that from that moment his card was marked, and it's really just a matter of time. I don't think this was about any doubt on Putin's behalf. In fact, Putin was criticized by many parties not dealing with Prigozhin a lot earlier, and almost certainly the reason he didn't do that was Prigozhin had become a very powerful figure. You know, Prigozhin marshaled the forces in Africa, which is very lucrative, not only in mercenary fees, but also in some of the influence that they have over some of the resources in Africa. And Putin needed him. And the challenge was how to wean off that need before you could deal with the problem that was Prigozhin. But as to his actual demise, you talked about the potential of this flight. We don't know enough about it yet. You know, it was in Moscow airspace. It had a number of other people on board. It was owned by Prigozhin. But please call me a cynic, but these grey hairs come with, I don't believe in coincidences. It's no coincidence that within a couple of months, within a matter of weeks of that abortive coup, Wagner's influence on the world has been decreased. Yevgeny Prigozhin has found himself increasingly isolated. And here we are reporting on his apparent demise in a crash. It does appear that the problem that was Prigozhin has now been solved by President Putin.
And Sean, we're hearing from Russia's civilian aviation regulator that Yevgeny Prigozhin was on the passenger list. However, it's not immediately clear if he had boarded the flight. But there are unconfirmed media reports that this aircraft that's crashed belonged to Yevgeny Prigozhin. Now, of course, Sean, we saw Yevgeny Prigozhin in a video a couple of days ago, the first sighting of him since that attempted mutiny back in June. He was seemingly in Africa in that video, although that is also unconfirmed. And here we are now, a couple of days later, hearing this news that he was on board a plane inside Russia. Does that surprise you?
Not at all. Several military analysts, when we were watching that most recent video that you referred to of him in Africa, described it as almost a final act of desperation. He seemed to be trying to market the wares of the Wagner Group. He was seemingly trying to drum up some customers for his wares. There were reports that Wagner had had to reduce the salaries available because Putin wasn't paying for them and Prigozhin wasn't able to subsidize them. And it was almost trying to drum up support. In a way, that seemed a little sad. And he was doing it out of the country, almost in direct competition, because we also understand that the Russian MOD was also out in Africa at the same time, also trying to drum up support for them helping with some mercenary or at least military training and forces. So in a way, Prigozhin's sort of desperation to survive and hopefully keep his Wagner mercenary group alive by supporting Africa and potentially the very lucrative contracts out there does appear to actually have been the final straw. And the very fact that he felt comfortable operating in Russia, if he was in his own jet, that would probably have been a degree of comfort around his security. But bluntly, I know it's easy to say with hindsight, but Sally, we've been talking about him for some time. It is no great surprise to see that for him, the war is over. And I'm, in a way, just surprised it's taken this long.